Why were we put here? I think everyone wants to know, why were we put here? Why are we on earth?
My purpose in life is to live a normal life, to be a citizen, a productive citizen.
Intentar pasar por la vida de la manera más desapercibida posible.
I don't fully know why I'm here, but I enjoy that. I enjoy knowing that because then that creates endless possibilities for myself.
I would like to make a difference, even if it's only in one life. I'd prefer to do more.
Because I think the meaning of life, in my opinion, is to find something that you're passionate about and use that passion to make the world around you a better place.
Does life have a purpose? Have any of you asked yourselves that before? Just me? No, I'm sure many of you have. I've shared this before, my exit out of law enforcement that was years and years ago. I was so identified as an Idaho State Trooper that was who I was. And then when I was injured and they did surgeries and they took me out of that field, I couldn't continue in that field, it really shocked me. It blindsided me. I could never have anticipated that. I felt abandoned and I felt confused. I went from having a clear sign of what my purpose in life was, to be a trooper, to, well, what do I do now? What's my purpose now? I went from being a comfortable place where everything was going fine until, well, what are the important things in life now? And I'm sure many of you can identify, whether you were married at one time and then divorced, whether you were working your career and then you went to not working or went to retirement, your identity changed. Maybe you went from healthy to having some kind of diagnosis that rocked your world. And you wonder, what's going on? What is my purpose? Because when life is going really well, we usually don't think about what our purpose is. That's why it's so difficult to reach out to 30, 40, and 50 years old, because they've got their health and their job and their house and their boat and everything. Everything's going great with them. But the times when we do question our role in the world, they can be really troubling, especially if we suspect that there is no purpose. On the other hand, even for those who believe, those who know that there is an ultimate meaning behind it all, still trying to find the answers to our daily life's questions can be really difficult. Who should I spend my time with? Where should I work? How should I spend my money? What is going to make me happy? And when we look back, those are very self-centered questions. They're focused on ourselves. There's a Russian author, and Leo Tolstoy, if any of you read War and Peace. He had it all. He had family, he had success, he had wealth, he had fame. By the world standards, he should have been overflowing with joy and happiness and contentment and purpose, but he did not. He was not. The thing that it haunted him, and everything he did was death. Tolstoy, he could not shake this feeling that the finality of death, that at some point he was going to die. And this inevitable death made his life meaningless. He writes in 1883, this is from one of his shorter works, this is what Tolstoy writes. He writes, "Then what is life for? To die? To kill myself at once? No, I am afraid. To wait until death comes? I fear that even more. Then I must live, but what for? In order to die?" You could tell he was stuck here. What is the purpose of life? Why are we here? I'm going to share another quote with Tolstoy at the very end of this sermon. The first person to write in detail about this search for meaning was King Solomon. And we read about that in Ecclesiastes. I'm going to hang out in Ecclesiastes for a little bit if you want to open your Bibles to chapter 1 and chapter 2. He was king over the ancient nation of Israel. He was more rich and more powerful and more wise than any living person on earth. God said, ask me what you want. And he said, well, I want a discerning heart. I want wisdom. I want to know how to apply this knowledge, not just knowledge. So King Solomon, he had it all, he tried it all, and he discovered some really profound things as a result. So this is from Ecclesiastes 1. This is verse 2. So this is the very beginning of his book. He says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. All is mist. I like the NIV version. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And this, I want you to read Ecclesiastes. I always want you to read the Bible, which is probably a good thing. I'm encouraging you to do that. I want you to read Ecclesiastes, but don't get bogged down in the meaningless part. You have to get to the end of the book, and it's very rewarding for that. So King Solomon, he was the wisest person in the world. His introduction in verse 2, he implies that riches and power and education and status and sex and adrenaline and knowledge, you name it, are not things that give our lives meaning. Because these things are like mist. These things can temporarily distract us from this question and even give us some temporary satisfaction, but they will not reveal our purpose. We cannot find our purpose in the things of this world because the things of this world vanish. Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 16, King Solomon says, I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is a striving after the wind. He says, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. And I was thinking, what's a really practical story about that? And I thought of 12, 15 years ago, I was taking piano lessons from a professor at Fresno State. She was on the faculty there. And we were studying Bach and Beethoven. It was absolutely amazing. I was hungry for it. I wanted more and more and more. And then she said something, and it wasn't anything bad, but she said something. And do you ever have one of those moments in your life where you remember exactly where you were? All the colors, what was going on, what you were wearing, the whole situation. She said that there is more classical piano music that has been written than I have time left on earth to even play through. And I thought, wow, that's depressing. That's really sad. And it's a good thing that I didn't value my worth on how much piano music I could get through in this life, because then everything would be totally meaningless. As I increased my knowledge, this also increased my sorrow. In the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon says, he spared no expense according to this world. And if the Eagles were to write a song, it would be similar to this. He knew all the right people, took all the right pills, threw outrageous parties, and paid heavenly bills. In Ecclesiastes 2, verse 10, he writes, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. He was not a man that was lacking. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all the things that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity, a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. King Solomon, the wisest man in the world, he comes to this conclusion: life is meaningless without God. And God gives everything meaning. So if you've come here and you just barely were able to get yourself up to come here and say, why do I got to be at church? It's much more comfortable at home, sleeping in bed or watching TV or whatever. Remember this. Life is meaningless without God, and God gives everything meaning. This is the message. So consider how we live. We either live that there is God, or if there is no God. There's a difference between believing in God and living as if he exists. One of the fastest growing religious groups in America is called practical atheism. They're people that claim that God exists, yet they don't live as if he exists. So consider how we answer that question, how this affects our meaning and our sense of purpose in life. If we were to believe in God, yet strived after only the things that this world can provide, then life is meaningless. What's the point? When I was 50, I went to see the skin doctor to make sure that I had things that were supposed to be there and didn't have things that weren't supposed to be there. And there was a mirror across. I was in the lobby. They called me back to the waiting room, and I was sitting on the table, and there was this big mirror across from me, and I was looking at myself the whole time before the doctor came in. And he came in, and he said, how's it going? And I said, well, Doc, I'm older than I thought I looked. And he said, well, what were you doing out in the lobby? And I said, well, I was reading People magazine. And he said, yeah, don't do that. The people in there don't naturally look like that. They have had a lot of work. That is not reality. You look fine for a 60-year-old guy. I was only 50. You look fine for a 50-year-old guy. I have noticed that more and more actors are moving out of Hollywood, and they're moving to Utah and Montana and Florida and all these different places. Could you imagine being caught up in your career that was totally, your life's meaning was judged on how you think you looked? And then as you got older and older, you didn't get cast for the roles that you wanted. How life would be meaningless. Could you imagine trying to find purpose in your wealth, or in your looks, or in your status? And I have a spoiler alert. At some point, you are going to take your final breaths. And we don't think about that very often. But at that time, are you going to be wishing that you just earned a little bit more money? Or that you wished you would have networked with more of the right people? Or that you would have achieved a little bit more status? Those aren't the things that we find meaning when we look at life. We get to Luke 15, and this is the story of the prodigal son, and Artis, you did a great job explaining that to the kids. This is an incredible story. So a man has two sons. The younger says, Dad, I want my inheritance now. So the father splits up the inheritance, gives it to the young son, and he blows it all on reckless living. He spares no expense. He spends it all on the things that he thinks were important, partying. And he ends up destitute, and he ends up just feeding these pigs, and he's throwing them these carob pods. He says he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate. This word in Greek, this keration, this is the husk of these carob seeds. After the fruit's taken out, after the pigs eat, he was hoping just to eat these husks. Kind of like, you know how like peas in a pod, the peas come out? Kind of like that. He was hoping just to eat the husks. And it says no one gave him anything. So he realizes he is going to have to go back to his father because he cannot survive doing this. And he knows he's going to go back and ask his father for forgiveness. He's going to say, Father, I sinned. I'm sorry. I blew it all. And in verse 20, it says, this man arose and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. The son says, Dad, I have sinned against you, and I am not worthy of even being called your son. And the father welcomes him home with these arms that are just wide open. And he throws this huge party celebrating his son's return. In verse 24, he says, "My son was dead and is alive again. He was lost, and now he is found." And they began to celebrate. In this parable, the Father is God, and we are the son that blew everything. We strove after our own interests. We did the things only we wanted to do, the things we thought we were important. And when we come to our senses and we return, we realize we have spent our time and energy on things that are meaningless, things that are like mist or vapor that just evaporate from us. God is waiting for us to come back to him. And some of us keep doing this U-turn thing. We come back to him and then we do our own thing. And then when that fails, then we come back to God and we do his thing. Every time that we're willing to turn around from what we're doing and come back to God, God is there with his arms wide open. He is willing to bring us back every single time that we want to come back to him. God is waiting for us. He's waiting for us like the Father in this parable. He is waiting for us because he is our Father and we are his child. You are God's child. This is our identity. This is our purpose. This is who we are. We are children of the living God. Nothing can take that away. This cannot evaporate for you. This is who we are. Every single person on earth was created to know and love God personally. And life is meaningless without God. And God gives everything meaning. I'm going to get back to Leo Tolstoy so you know the end of the sermon is coming. Sometimes I should clap or something because... Did I tell you about when I was a vicar, I would preach, and there was a guy, he was like in his upper 80s, and when it was my time to preach that week, he would pull his chair out and slide down so his head was resting on the back of the chair, because he was just going to start at the place of sleep instead of falling asleep. So I want you to hear this part. In 1884, so 1883, Tolstoy is saying, life has no meaning. Am I just living so I can die? 1 year later, he writes in a book called What I Believe, and in this book, he openly confesses his faith, and he declared his belief in Jesus Christ. He found meaning. So does life have a purpose? Yes, absolutely. And this purpose is totally tied into your self-identity. You are a child of the living God, and our purpose is to love God and love others. This is who we are. This is the meaning. This is our purpose. So if you look on my Facebook, and I'm not saying this because, to point out I'm a great guy or anything like this, but on my Facebook, on my bio, it says, child of God, husband, father, pastor. Because those are my priorities. I want all of us to have those same priorities. How you identify yourself is I'm a child of God. God made me and loves me. This is who I am. If you know anybody that's struggling with this question or struggling with other questions like that, bring them to church. Have them tune in online if they don't want to come here in person. Because we're going to, over the next 6 or 7 weeks, we're going to talk about some of these tough questions on does life have a purpose? And now you can all confidently say, yeah, of course it does. I'm a child of God and I'm meant to love God and love others. This is my role. Amen.